Well, we're here to talk about The Architect's Dream. It's a new book written by the Time executive editor Nikhil Kumar, someone who's been a journalist and reported in various parts of the world. And this is his first book, a work of fiction. And he's here with us to talk more about it. Thank you so much, Nikhil, for being here with us. And first and foremost, I have to ask, as a journalist, someone who's covered so many different stories, how did you come up with the work of fiction?
It was partly because, like you and like so many others of our colleagues, we spend our time writing about what's actually going on in the world, and that's what you do day to day. And so this was kind of a way to step away from that and look at what happens behind the stories that we cover in the lives of just individual people, because our job is, the big headline and what's happening, and that sometimes misses what's happening in people's lives, just ordinary individuals, what's going on with them. And so this was kind of my way of trying to delve into that.
All right, but it is a very poignant book. It's somewhat tragic. It's a love story. There are various themes intertwined, including politics, media as well. So that's very interesting. The Architect's Dream, one of the main themes is architecture. All your protagonists were studying architecture at SPA right here in Delhi. How did you come up with architecture as the way to tell this story?
So part of it is just that I've always been interested in architecture. I like buildings. I remember when I arrived at university as an undergraduate and saw everybody else who was studying architecture. I was doing philosophy, and I felt very, very jealous that why wasn't I doing that, but it was too late because I'd already enrolled. So it was partly that, and it also seemed just like an interesting way to explore this city. Delhi is a place which has some pretty extraordinary architecture, and these three characters live here, study here. One of them leaves and goes away and comes back. I'm not going to give away much about the plot, but the city remains with them via its buildings, the way it's constructed, and particularly the modernist side of Delhi. Because when we talk about Delhi, quite often we're talking about Old Delhi and Red Fort and so on, which is great, but there is also so much more in this city, and some of that came about through the characters and their lives, and Delhi almost became a protagonist in the architecture of Delhi.
That it is. You do celebrate the old architecture as well as the new. You talk about the cement of Delhi and the various buildings. They say sometimes the first book that someone writes is sometimes a bit semi-biographical. Like, I've written a book as well, and I do know that as my experience as an environment journalist, I use that in my book. So was there anything in this that came from your personal life?
I mean, I suppose that's for others to say, the ones who know me. I'll say this much, that I did write another novel which will never see the light of day because it's so bad, in my 20s, and it was very, very autobiographical. So I don't think this is as much. What it is that it's a composite of a lot of people that I've met over the years, right? I don't know if this happened with you, but certainly the characters are not one person that I know. But when I go back and look at it, many of them are composites of many, many people that I've met in various walks of life, not just here, but elsewhere when I've been working, living, friends, relatives, etc. So I guess to that extent there is autobiography in it, but it's not my story.
Right. Well, that is bound to happen. One, takes from what one knows. There's also a sense of homecoming. You spoke about Delhi being almost like a character in this book, which it is, and the people who are going to read it will see more of that. But yes, there's a sense of homecoming, and as someone who's in the U.S. And you obviously have lived in Delhi, and there's a sense of home here. Is that something that you wanted to draw in this book? Because one of the main protagonists is in New York, and he comes back to Delhi.
Not consciously, but yeah, I wouldn't dispute that at all. Because when I was born in this city, but then I left when I was young with my parents. And I only lived here as an adult when I got sent here as a foreign correspondent. And I was here for a few years. And that was partly my way of coming back and building my own community and life in this city. Because otherwise you come here, you meet your, chacha or whatever, and then you go back, right? And so to that extent, because that's when this was written, and a lot of it was written, a lot of the scenes where people are meeting in certain places and they encounter people in certain places, I went to those places because I just lived here. It was easy.
Overlooking Nizamuddin,
right,
etc.
Right, and so So I wouldn't dispute that at all. Like, it was a function of that's when this was created, when I was kind of living here and acquainting myself with this place that is home, but was kind of a home that was very far away. It didn't feel like home in terms of my friends and so on. But not,
Right. So, as a journalist and someone who's in news television, I found it very interesting how it's also a little bit of commentary on the politics of our time. If you could talk about that, because there's a lot of these sort of very opportunistic controversies, pushed by certain individuals just to gain some traction, etc. And that's something we really see, especially in news television, day in, day out.
Yeah. No. So there is. I mean, the story, again, without giving too much away, is really the story of these three characters, two men and a woman, all three of whom are architects. But you're right, it unfolds against the backdrop of, I was about to say changing politics, but the changed politics of this country, because now we're several years in.
So it does start with Dr. Manmohan Singh.
It starts there, and then,
yes.
right, and it ends with, where we are now, essentially. Well, a few years in the past, but like very much in this politics. And yeah, I mean, it's...
And there was some reference, I felt, to Ram Mandir movement as well.
There is, like I said,
it definitely was
there.
Yeah,
it was there. Because all our lives, wherever we live, unfold our turmoils, our obsessions, our crises, unfold against the backdrop of all kinds of bigger things going on, and that's what was going on here. And it plays into the, one of the characters happens to be Muslim, which somebody asked me about this the other day, and that wasn't a conscious decision, it was just the way the characters came together in my head. But then it was unavoidable that it wouldn't have all kinds of connections, I suppose, between what was happening in your private life and your personal turmoil and what's happening behind you. So it's there. What I did want to avoid was something that I think ends up happening with a lot of books from places such as India, that too many people, I think, end up using fiction as a way of doing non-fiction. And, characters become proxies for the nation, right? And there was certainly a time for that, and there is still a place for that. But too much of that can sometimes, it's a very hard thing to pull off, let's put it that way. And what I was more interested in is, well, how does just an ordinary individual life unfold against this kind of backdrop? So, and that's what happens in the books, right? This is, as you said, it's a tragic love story.
It's very tragic, and a lot of pain.
There's a lot of pain and turmoil against the backdrop of a bigger pain and national turmoil, and the two intersect because of, again, a plot point that I won't give away, but hoping that people will buy it. Yeah.
Well, the title, The Architect's Dream, you refer to it in the book. It's a painting, but it seems larger than that. Tell us about it. How did you arrive at this?
It is a
title?
painting. It's a painting from a long time ago, which portrays one sense of what architecture should be like, which is, a kind of a kind of stage for these great monuments, and there is a counter narrative in the book about the way architecture should be, that it should more be about the way we live, our communities, and so on. So it came about mostly because I just loved this painting very much. I remember seeing it years and years ago, and it just stayed with me. And so when I sat down to write this book, it just came back to me and became part of it. Because the book really began not so much, to go back to where you started, it didn't begin, as much as I'm in love with and fascinated by architecture, and as much as I cared about this painting when I saw it and stuck with me, the book really began with this one scene, which is now in the middle of the book, where one character encounters another character, right? And that was, I didn't know who the characters were, right? I didn't know why they were there, I didn't know what they were doing. And so it became like a process of working out, like a journalist. Something's happened, why has it happened? And that led to the book.
And it goes back and forth in time. Was that difficult when you were writing it? Because, when I was reading it, I had to go back to the start of the chapter and say, oh, this was then, and etc. So that's an interesting way to, put it out there.
It sort of, the structure came about almost by itself, in that that's just where the story went. Certainly when I had to go back and during the process of editing and revising, make sure a lot of things lined up with each other. But the book sort of ends where it begins, if you notice, right? Like the last sentence and a sentence at the beginning, like it all connects and it's all circular. And it's partly just, again, a function of that these characters spend most of their lives running away from all kinds of internal questions that they refuse to answer, confrontations that they refuse to, well, confront themselves. But it catches up with them, and which leads to, unfortunately, all kinds of tragedy at the end. Which I have to say, like, I wasn't looking to write a tragic story, but the one thing that I did think at the outset, and I think happens with these characters, is that, and to, you know, with the broader politics point that you raised, is that we often think of tragedies and turmoil as big things, right? Something big happens, right? A government changes, and it leads to this happening and that happening, and people's lives change. And that happens, no doubt. But what also happens, I think, is that a lot of the turmoil that individuals go through happens because of tiny, tiny things that they don't say or don't do at various points in their life that sort of snowballs, and then at some point leads to something bigger, which is what happens to these characters.
That's right. Regret and having not said what you should have said at the time. So, for your readers, what is it that you hope they'll take away from this book, from this story? As we said, it's a tragic love story. It's somewhat like star-crossed lovers. There's a, it's a triangle as well, and there's a lot of as you know, sadness as well towards the end of it. But yes, so what do you hope that readers would take away from it?
Look, I don't have a message. I'll say this. I mean, that's a very hard question to answer. I'll probably need a long time to think about it. But what I will say is that for me, a lot of books that I love, well, all the books that I love, the fiction that I love and read, the novels that I love, the short stories that I love, are ones that I go back to again and again. I sort of reread. I often think that's for me certainly, a good guide to whether a book has spoken to me or not, whether, if I can reread it, again. And so I don't have a message, but I do hope that people, if they read it, and I hope they read it, that they reread it.
That they reread it. Yeah, that's wonderful as an author to, be reread. And finally, how long did it take you to write this? If you could tell us a little bit about your process.
It didn't, well, the initial scene that I described to you, which was the beginning of the book, came about at some point, I forget, 2017, 18. And then it didn't go anywhere. I was just stuck. And, I just didn't know what the story was. And I had a day job, and so, things take over and so on. And I kept writing and writing and writing, and I wrote more than twice the length of this book that just didn't work. And then at some point, it did start to work. The characters came sharper into focus. And then the book itself took about 6 months. But as I say, that's misleading, because I can say 6 months, but in fact, it took me some time to work out where the characters were going and what the story was. I thought it was something else entirely when I started. And by the time I ended, it was something else.
It's interesting how that happens, isn't it? Because when you start writing, and sometimes it's as if it just takes over and you just don't even realize, and it goes in a direction that you hadn't actually planned.
Right. And that's precisely what happened here. So the final stretch was 6 odd months, but that final stretch came about after a year or two of just thinking about where they're going and writing a lot that just did not work. I hope it works now.
Well, it certainly did for me. I really enjoyed it. So thank you so much, Nikhil Kumar, and all the best with the book, The Architect's Dream. It's a very interesting book, as we again don't want to give too much away, but as you could get from that conversation, it is a love story. It is somewhat tragic. It's also intertwined with modern day India and Delhi.